What's up, fam? Welcome back to another chilling chapter. Before we dive into today's twisted mystery, Miss Marple and Death Followed the Invitation, hit me up. What made you smile today? And where in the world are you listening from? I'm featuring your stories in the next drop, so don't be shy. Now grab your tea, dim the lights, and get ready, because nothing in Whispers in the Fog is ever what it seems. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The Locked Door at Midnight. The clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the echoing emptiness of Monkswell Manor. Rain lashed against the windows, cascading down like relentless tears. Inside, the grandeur of the old house seemed swallowed by an oppressive hush, broken only by the occasional creak of ancient wood and the soft patter of raindrops. It was a typical, tempestuous night in the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, the kind of night when secrets bubbled to the surface and dread riffled through the corridors like an unwelcome guest. In the darkened drawing room, the flickering flames of the fireplace cast a dim, dancing light. Miss Marple sat tucked in her armchair, knitting needles clicking in steady rhythm. But she was not simply any ordinary old woman. She was the village's most astute observer, a woman whose sharp eyes missed nothing. The room's otherwise serene ambiance was abruptly interrupted when a muffled scream echoed from the upper floors. Her needles dropped as she sprang to her feet. "Did you hear that, Dolly?" The housekeeper, a stout woman with a hesitant disposition, emerged from the kitchen, wiping her flour-dusted hands on her apron. The apprehension on her face was tangible. "I did, Miss Marple. It sounded—" She trembled as she spoke. It sounded like it came from Lady Marjorie's room. Without a moment's hesitation, Miss Marple strode towards the grand staircase, her heart pounding in sync with the thunder outside. The fact that the door to Lady Marjorie's quarters was locked spoke volumes, but offered little comfort. With each step echoing against the wooden treads, tension coiled within her. Lady Marjorie, a recluse since the passing of her husband, had just recently returned to the manor after a prolonged journey abroad. Rumor had it she was haunted by a terrible secret, and it seemed someone might have come to extract it from her. "Fetch Mr. Eames, the house steward, Dolly," Miss Marple instructed, her voice steady in the face of mounting urgency. "We shall need his assistance." Without delay, the housekeeper dashed down to the foyer, leaving Miss Marple alone, standing before the heavy oak door adorned with intricate carvings. Marple leaned in, straining to hear through the thick wood. Silence. Uneasiness settled over her shoulders like a dark cloak when she suddenly caught sight of a quivering shadow creeping beneath the door. "Lady Marjorie, are you in there?" she called, knocking gently. "It's Miss Marple. Can you speak?" The only response was the whisper of the wind through the trees outside, blending with the heartbeat of her anxiety. The door remained stubbornly shut, though she could hear the soft sound of something being pushed across the floor. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the weight of anticipation. Suddenly, footsteps resounded down the hall. Mr. Eames appeared, his usually composed demeanor marred by worry. "Miss Marple," he gasped, "I heard the scream too. What shall we do?" "We must break the door down," she resolved, "if Lady Marjorie is in danger." The rest she dared not voice. Quick and decisive, Mr. Eames retrieved a stout bar and placed it against the door. With a mighty heave, the door splintered open, revealing a cloud of dust swirling in the musty air, and as the door swung wide, an unsettling scene unfolded. The room was dimly lit, and Lady Marjorie lay sprawled across the floor, her pale dress partially crumpled beneath her. An unsettling sight, but worse, was the absence of blood or any visible injury. What drew Miss Marple's attention was the unmistakable scent of bitter almonds lingering in the air, a telltale sign of cyanide poisoning, though that risk was heightened by the shattered glass that lay nearby, a half-empty bottle held in her delicate hand. "Quick, call for Dr. Brent," Miss Marple instructed, kneeling beside Lady Marjorie, "and secure the area. We should not allow anyone to leave." As Mr. Eames scurried off, Miss Marple surveyed the room. Beside the overturned chair lay a scattering of papers, letters, several addressed to Lady Marjorie, their contents promising the uncovering of fears long buried. But one caught her eye, heavy with ink, yet trembling with urgency. Eyebrows knitting, she drew it closer. This one was different. "To my dearest Marjorie," she read aloud, "if you do not return my letters, I shall reveal everything you have tried to hide." Her voice trailed off as she gripped the paper tighter. Who had sent this warning? In that instant, the door swung violently open and Dolly rushed back in, breathless. "Dr. Brent is on his way. What happened in here?" Miss Marple's eyes narrowed, and she glanced at Lady Marjorie's sleeping form. Was it slumber induced by poison, or was there deeper treachery at play? "We have much to uncover, Dolly," she replied, determination fluttering in her chest. "But I fear this is only the beginning." Suddenly, a resounding crash echoed from the next room. "What was that?" Dolly gasped, her face draining of color. "I do not know," breathed Miss Marple, dread curling at the edge of her mind. "But we'd best investigate." As they moved toward the source of the sound, Miss Marple's mind raced with possibilities. The room was filled with unanswered questions and motives concealed beneath layers of gentility. Suddenly, amid the muffled chaos, a soft whisper caught her ear. "Help me." The voice seemed to seep through the walls of the manor like a ghost back from the grave. The two women halted in disbelief, and Miss Marple's heart raced anew. "Who is there?" she called, sharp and commanding. Silence followed, but her instincts told her she was close to uncovering something monumental. Just then, her gaze fell on the trace of a footprint leading away from the door and toward the window. As darkness enveloped Monkswell Manor, Miss Marple knew that the night was far from over. They were tied within a web of deception, and each clue whispered tantalizing possibilities. With the mystery deepening, she would pursue the answers relentlessly, aware that the truth was locked behind many doors and behind the looming shadows, danger awaited. "Dolly," she said finally, her tone grave, "I fear we have a murderer in our midst." As the storm raged beyond the manor's walls, Miss Marple grasped the edge of her knitting, steel resolve in her heart. The investigation had only just begun, but one thing was clear. Someone did not want the truth unveiled, and now it was a race against time. Before it was too late. Chapter 2. An Invitation to Danger. The rain lashed against the window panes of St. Mary Mead as a howling wind sent shivers through the venerable manor of Miss Marple. With the darkened sky, a palpable sense of foreboding cloaked the village, enshrouding every cottage, shop, and hedgerow in a damp, dismal shroud. It was on such a blustery evening that Miss Marple, curled in her armchair with a knitted shawl draped across her shoulders, received a most unusual letter. The envelope, lavishly adorned with a swirling crimson wax seal, had been delivered by hand, an uncommon occurrence for a village where nothing much ever happened. As she carefully peeled open the envelope, she sensed an electric charge, a visceral intuition, only honed by years of observation and experience. Inside was an ornate invitation to a dinner party hosted by Lord Ashcombe at his grand estate, Ashcombe Manor, to celebrate the unveiling of a rare collection of priceless antiques. The dinner was scheduled for the following Saturday, ostensibly a luxurious event fit for the crème de la crème of society. Yet, Miss Marple's instincts pricked at the edges of her curiosity. Why this sudden desire for her presence? She was a simple spinster, known more for her knitting than her social engagements. Just as she was pondering the potential excitement and risk of attending such an event, a knock broke through the rhythmic patter of the rain. Opening the door, she was met by her close friend and neighbour, Miss Hartnell, her face a mask of concern. "Ah, Jane," Miss Marple said, gesturing her inside. "What a night! Is it the weather that brings you here, or is it the spectre of something far less pleasant?" "It's the invitation, Agatha," Miss Hartnell exclaimed, shaking the rain from her umbrella with urgency. "I do hope you have not given in to the lure of Ashcombe Manor. There are whispers, you know, whispers of danger." "Danger?" Miss Marple mused, carefully folding the letter and placing it on the mantelpiece alongside a small ceramic cat that had seen better days. "There certainly seems to be a darker shadow surrounding the Ashcombe estate than the weather tonight. It's not just the manor's unsettling history." Miss Hartnell leaned closer, lowering her voice as if the very walls could hear. "Lord Ashcombe has recently inherited a considerable fortune that came from some unsavoury dealings. They say there are those who would rather have that wealth in their own pockets. I wonder if he will have company at the dinner that knows a detestable crime when they see one." "Indeed, that does sound like a fine recipe for a pushing contest," Miss Marple replied, her eyes narrowing in thought. "But I must confess to a curiosity about these antiques. Fine pieces can reveal an intricacy far deeper than their mere appearance. They may just hold a clue or a riddle to unfold." Miss Hartnell's brow furrowed. "I am rather worried, dear Agatha. You must take care. Do keep your wits about you. These events can become much more than socially elaborate dinners. There's much talking of a certain painting, the very one that Lord Ashcombe is unveiling." Miss Marple leaned back, her mind dancing with possibilities. "What painting is that, Jane?" "Rumour has it to be a portrait of Lady Greystoke, a most elusive historical figure who supposedly had ties to a famous, if not notorious, disappearance." Miss Hartnell's voice thickened with intrigue. "Some say she was a spy, others that she was a mere victim of circumstance, but the last owner of the painting mysteriously vanished on a dark, stormy night similar to this one. It gave the painting an aura of foreboding." There was a moment of silence as the realization struck Miss Marple with sudden intensity. The dinner at Ashcombe was not merely an occasion for social niceties. It was an invitation steeped in history, a window into secrets of the past, and possibly current dangers. "I shall heed your warning, but I must also accept this invitation," Miss Marple stated resolutely, her eyes glimmering with determination. For what better way to discover the truth than to step into the very lion's den? As the evening wore on and the shadows lengthened, Miss Marple pored over the invitation again, pondering the implications. One particular detail began to stand out. The invitation was handwritten, something unusual for a man of Lord Ashcombe's standing. The penmanship was bold, yet fluid, indicative of someone accustomed to expressing himself with vigor, but there appeared to be an error in the invitation's date. Saturday, the 21st. That made little sense, as today was the 19th. It appears Lord Ashcombe is disorganized in his affairs, or it reflects something more intentional, she murmured, as she took note of the 21st, penned with too much haste. She regarded the sky outside, knowing that the elements would be less than cooperative. Then, with a sudden jolt, her mind recalled the last conversation she'd had with the village shoemaker a few days prior. He mentioned having seen Lord Ashcombe in town, seeking out a certain ally under the cover of darkness, whispering words that sent a chill down her spine. What could the wealthy lord need with a man like that? As if compelled by some unseen force, Miss Marple grabbed her coat, determination etching shadows across her delicate features. There was an invitation to unravel, but it came wrapped in an unsettling host of secrets, and she would not allow herself to be ensnared in the web without understanding its true origins. The rain continued its relentless assault as she stepped out into the darkened streets of St. Mary Mead, her heart beating in time with the thunder rumbling above. Behind her, the manor loomed like a forbidding fortress, harboring untold truth and perhaps even treachery. Suddenly, a flash of lightning illuminated a figure at the corner of the street. Was it her imagination or reality? The shadow appeared to flee, darting into the enveloping darkness as Miss Marple took her first determined steps toward unraveling the enigma that was Ashcombe Manor, wondering what awaited her in the folds of that invitation. For tonight, it certainly seemed, danger was not merely invited, it was waiting for her arrival. Chapter 3. The Last Guest at the Midnight Train. The rain fell in a relentless hammer on the windows of Grange Hill Manor, each droplet a weary reminder of the chill that wrapped itself around the sleepy village more tightly than the fog that shrouded the streets. Miss Jane Marple sat by the hearth, her sharp, observant eyes taking in the flickering glow of the flames. It was a quiet night, one that invited an unbidden sense of foreboding, and as the old clock chimed midnight, she felt a familiar thrill in the air, the thrill of a mystery unfolding. Just as she reached for a delicate teacup, a frantic knock reverberated through the hallway, startling her from her reverie. The manor was expecting no visitors at this hour, and with a glance out the leaded glass window, she noted the blurred figure gripped by shadows dancing against the rain. Rising with grace, she moved toward the door. Curiosity piqued. When she opened it, a figure stumbled in, gasping for breath. Drenched from the downpour, it was Philip Collins, the local librarian. His face was pale, eyes wide with terror. "Miss Marple, you must help. It's dreadful. Patterson's been murdered." The words tumbled out like rocks, each one heavy with implication. Murdered? Miss Marple stepped aside to let him in, her heart racing in sync with the wild rhythm of the storm outside. "At this hour? Do tell me more." "He was found near the train station just moments ago. No one saw it happen, but I heard Mr. Latham shouting. I rushed to see—" Philip's voice trailed off as he pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. "He was last seen boarding the midnight train." Miss Marple's mind shifted into high gear. Did he indeed board the train, or was he the last guest forever lost in its depths? She moved swiftly to the coat rack, pulling on a raincoat. Philip nodded vigorously. "They're all agog at the station." But I sensed a tension in the air. Something foul. With dire urgency, they made their way to the station, the rain drumming a sinister beat into the darkness. The platforms lay deserted, except for a pair of disgruntled railway workers glaring at the downpour with impatient expressions. The scent of wet earth mingled with the iron tang of steel. This was where lives intersected. where trains departed, and where perhaps they would also uncover deception. Did anyone see Mr. Patterson after he departed from the manor? Miss Marple queried the workers. Only young Tom Whitaker, one replied, a stout man with a thick, bushy brow. Used to be a friend of Patterson's, you know, until he, well, you know how it is. Scandal makes for strange company. Scandal? Miss Marple's voice sharpened. What happened? He was found mingling with unsavory folk, they say. Never came back to the village after that. The man begins to draw circles of the oddest kind. Philip glanced at Miss Marple, alarm apparent in his expression. Our town has never been the same since the treachery came to light. Miss Marple murmured, lost in thought, her mind churning with dizzying possibilities. There was more to Patterson's secrets than she initially assumed. They pressed on toward the station's ticket office. Just as they stepped inside, a low, raspy voice floated toward them like a hiss in the wind. Help you, Miss Marple? This time of night? Tom Whitaker leaned against a pillar, an illusion of mischief dancing in his eyes. There's a footnote you've missed in this misbegotten tale. Your interest in Patterson suggests you have a story worth telling, Miss Marple replied, neither willing to indulge nor retreating into social niceties. Tom shrugged, a signal of half-hearted indifference. They say he was digging deeper than he should have, probing where no man ought to probe. People don't take kindly to curiosities, he said, his voice turning conspiratorial. Philip took a step closer. What do you mean? Oh, things that should remain buried, if you catch my drift. Patterson was sniffing around the wrong garden, if you will. Tom leaned closer, raising an eyebrow. Best keep your distance, Miss Marple, lest you find yourself embroiled with the wrong kind of company. At that moment, the gravelly voice of the station master, Mr. Sutton, broke through. All right, children, enough of your jabbering. The constable's on his way, and the body has already been moved. Best head back if you wish to avoid any more of this mess. As tension thickened, Miss Marple's keen observation caught a glint beneath Tom's collar, a silver watch chain gleaming in the flickering station light. A lovely timepiece indeed. Familiar too, but suddenly the link in the mystery prompted a rush of thought. What time does it say? She inquired casually. Tom glanced down, caught off guard. Why, it says 8, but that's hardly important. Miss Marple's instincts flared. If it is indeed 8, then how could you have seen Patterson right before the midnight train? And who is it that jangled so close to an untimely demise? Before Tom could respond, a sharp whistle echoed throughout the station, followed by a train heading out, cloaked in darkness. Panic surged within Miss Marple. Had the secret left with it? Could Patterson's final guest be more elusive than shadows? But there was a puzzle piece here, yet to be uncovered. Philip looked to Miss Marple, confusion etched across his face. What's the next move? How do we find out what really happened? A little finesse, dear Philip, a little finesse, she said, her eyes alight with intrigue. But first, we have to undo the ties that bind the truth and its many distractions. As they turned to leave, a figure emerged from behind the station sign, a woman in the heavy wool coat, eyes wild with a knowing edge. You're looking for answers, aren't you? Then come quickly, for the midnight train has one last guest. With that final utterance, demanding and ominous, the chapter hung suspended in time, an unsettling truth waiting to be unraveled, drawing Miss Marple yet deeper into the mystery that entwined the lives of those they thought they knew. Chapter 4. The Will That Was Never Signed. The tempest roared outside, rain lashing against the leaded windows of the old manor with a ferocity that seemed almost alive. Inside, a flickering candle cast trembling shadows across the polished oak of the drawing-room, illuminating Miss Marple's delicate features as she sat nestled in her favourite armchair, knitting needles silent in her hands. The atmosphere crackled not just with the advancing storm, but with an unspoken tension that had built through the evening's earlier revelations. Across from her, Agatha Whittaker was pacing. Her normally cheerful demeanour faded into a picture of distress. "Miss Marple, I can't bear it," Agatha exclaimed, her hands wringing the fabric of her skirt. "You must understand, anything could happen now that Robert is gone. The police are searching for answers, but they're too young, too naive, to see the implications." "Yes, indeed," Miss Marple agreed softly, her keen eyes narrowing as she observed Agatha. The young woman had been an old friend of Robert Thatchley, the local squire whose sudden and suspicious death had sent ripples through Larkspur village. "But tell me, dear, what are you most frightened of specifically?" Agatha froze, her hands stilled momentarily. "The will, Miss Marple. I overheard Robert speaking to Mr. Macyard, his solicitor, the night he summoned you. All of us. I fear for what might happen if it is truly discovered that the will was never signed." "Indeed," Miss Marple mused, her mind spiraling into a web of intrigue, a lethal combination of inheritance and unsigned intentions. The tangled threads of human nature can lead to dreadful discourse. Miss Marple turned her gaze toward the library door, where she had seen the odd flicker of light moments earlier. It wasn't the candle she had anticipated, but rather the beam from a flashlight, moving erratically beyond the cracked wood. "It seems we have more company." Before Agatha could respond, the door creaked open, revealing the shape of Constable Hargreaves. He appeared harried, the gleam of rainwater on his uniform reflecting the dim light of the gallery behind him. "Miss Marple, Miss Whittaker, I do hope I'm not interrupting undue revelries, but there's been another development." Agatha stepped forward, concern etched on her pale features. "What is it, Constable?" "We've just received an anonymous note claiming that the late Mr. Thatchley had a hidden will that could possibly upend everything we thought we knew. It was signed, 'Yours truly,' which seems rather playful given the gravity of the situation, but there's an address. It's worth looking into." He handed over the crumpled paper, and as she reached for it, Miss Marple's eyes flicked up at him, sharp, questioning. "Did you find anyone to vouch for the note's authenticity? There's a precarious trust in anonymity." "No, it's just slipped under the door at the station. There's little to trace back, unless we consider who might have wanted to set us on this wild chase." Miss Marple turned her attention back to Agatha, who looked even more agitated. "I can't bear any more surprises. If there is a family secret buried amongst the paperwork—" "Ah, but what better place for secrets than a household bereaved?" Miss Marple interjected. The rain struck harder against the window. "Tell me, Agatha, did Mr. Thatchley ever speak to you about his affairs? Anything that might suggest who stands to gain most?" Agatha trembled as she forced words from her lips. "He mentioned an uncle, an elusive man, involved in less than savory dealings at times. I never understood much more than that, but I sensed the mention of his name brought unease." As the storm intensified, the thunder drumming a cacophony overhead, Miss Marple drew the two of them toward the door. "We must go immediately to the address mentioned in the note," she urged, her tone resolute, "and look for any signs that might lead us closer to the heart of this mystery." Moments later, they found themselves outside in the relentless downpour. The narrow lane was lit only by the flickering lights of the manor behind them, and the overhanging branches loomed like dark sentinels as they trudged down the slick cobblestones. Agatha's complexion had taken on a ghostly pallor, while Constable Hargreaves endeavoured to keep their spirits up, though he too was increasingly apprehensive. When they finally reached the address, a dilapidated cottage, half hidden by wild brambles, it loomed before them like a spectre from another world. Creaky wooden steps sighed underfoot as they made their way to the door, their breaths visible in the cool air. "Check the back, Constable," Miss Marple insisted. "If there's any truth to the prodigious claims of the note, we must be thorough." With a nod, Hargreaves rounded the corner of the house, leaving Miss Marple and Agatha pushing hesitantly against the door. It surrendered with a groan, revealing a dusty entryway flooded in shadows. The air was dense, teeming with scents of mold and decay. As they stepped in, Agatha gasped, spotting what appeared to be a cracked photo frame lying on the floor, an image of Robert Thatchley himself, but it was marred by a red ink smudge, half erasing a face, leaving an indecipherable image. "Look," Agatha whispered hoarsely, leaning down to inspect it closely. Before Miss Marple could utter a word, the faint sound of scuffling reached their ears, drawing their attention deeper into the murky depths of the cottage. Hargreaves rejoined them, pale and bewildered. "I thought I saw movement, not of a rat, but of a man." "Then we mustn't waste another moment," Miss Marple commanded as they advanced further, adrenaline sharp and hearts racing in unison to the crescendo of the storm that seemed to mirror the tempest of their circumstances. And as they stepped through the doorway of the next room, Miss Marple felt a chill creep along her spine. Shadows danced ominously, and the revelation that awaited them could well tip the balance of the unfolding drama. A secret that could forever change the lives intertwined with Robert Thatchley's fate. The candle flickered, and with it, the hope of clarity seemed all but extinguished. Chapter 5. The Disappearance of Lady Verity. The rain fell in relentless sheets, tapping against the tall windows of Ashgrave Manor like the insistent whispers of a ghost. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of polished wood and damp linen. Miss Marple sat in the drawing-room, observing the gathering storm outside as she nursed a cup of weak tea. The manor's atmosphere was tinged with an uneasy tension, an oppressive weight that even the honeyed tones of the grandfather clock could not alleviate. It was a place steeped in secrets. At that moment, Lady Verity, the vibrant hostess of the weekend's gathering, was nowhere to be seen. Her absence, initially a curiosity, had morphed into something far more ominous. The thunder cracked loudly outside, startling the guests that sat clustered in hushed conversation. Among them was the enigmatic Mr. Charles Forsyth, the sharp-witted heir presumed to inherit the family's wealth. He was leaning back in his chair with a bemused expression, but Miss Marple noted the way his fingers tapped a quick rhythm on the armrest. His facade was deceptively easygoing, but there was something beneath the surface, an impatience that hinted at deeper troubles. "Has anyone thought to look for Lady Verity?" said Miss Marple, breaking the silence that enveloped the room like a shroud. Her voice carried wisdom, the kind that compelled attention and respect. "We've all searched her rooms and the gardens," said Mrs. Dorothea Primrose, tapping her foot nervously against the wooden floor. "It's as if she vanished into thin air. Truly, I cannot imagine what could have delayed her. She would never miss dinner." "There's something very peculiar going on," Mr. Forsyth interjected, his words laced with a hint of mockery. "Perhaps she's merely taken a whimsical night stroll to escape the stuffiness of our gathering." It must be the rain, keeping her indoors like a caged bird. Miss Marple narrowed her eyes. Or perhaps it is something more than whimsy that keeps her hidden. What do you think, Mr. Forsyth? Has Lady Verity seemed particularly preoccupied today? He shrugged, his casual demeanor faltering for just a moment. Preoccupied? No more so than usual, I should say. But then again, it is my understanding that— He glanced around the room, his smile faltering before an amused chuckle escaped him. Lady Verity has her mysteries, has she not? Indeed, she did, Miss Marple thought, recalling the troubled look that had flickered across Lady Verity's face earlier that evening. There had been a heaviness in her smile when she discussed the expanding rug business, the one her late husband had founded, now at risk of failure due to inexplicable market fluctuations. Miss Marple stood, suddenly resolute. "I will take a look around the manor once again," she declared, her voice firm. "There may be a clue, however elusive it might seem. Perhaps I could shed light on Lady Verity's disappearance." "Let me accompany you," said Mrs. Primrose, rising with a frantic desperation. "I won't rest, knowing she's unaccounted for. This storm is upon us, and there's dreadfully little light." Alone together, they braved the dark hallways as the rain lashed at the windows, creating an almost spectral ambience. They searched Lady Verity's study first, a cozy chamber filled with books and nestling papers. Yet, as they entered, Miss Marple felt a jolt of realization. The desk was disturbingly tidy, which was unusual for someone in her position. She stepped closer and noted the immaculate order of Lady Verity's belongings. Beneath the heavy oak desk, however, lay a single, unremarkable shoe, a satin slipper, oddly out of place. "Oh dear," Mrs. Primrose gasped. "What's that doing there?" "I believe, my dear Mrs. Primrose, that Lady Verity was in a hurry," Miss Marple surmised, picking it up gently with her handkerchief. "And this was discarded for a reason." At that moment, the sound of the grandfather clock echoed through the study like a gunshot, its toll resonating ominously in the silence. Miss Marple's heart raced as she pondered the thought. What if Lady Verity's disappearance was not merely a fanciful whim? What if it was something darker, a desperate flight from a reality she could no longer face? As they continued their search, they stumbled across Lady Verity's journal. The spine had cracked slightly, and it lay ajar. Curious, Miss Marple flipped through the pages tenderly. The last entries were filled with uncharacteristically frantic script, discussing fears of betrayal and a dark figure lurking in the shadows of her life. "Miss Marple, look at this," Mrs. Primrose gasped, pointing toward a particular line. "She wrote of a secret admirer, and then it trails off as if she has been interrupted." "Yes," Miss Marple whispered, her thoughts racing. "Interrupted, or perhaps taken." The room fell quiet as rain continued to patter against the windows. A sound outside caught their attention, the soft crunch of gravel, an unusual noise given the downpour. Miss Marple motioned for silence and edged closer to the window. Peering out into the night, she caught sight of a figure at the edge of the wood, tall, cloaked in darkness, and holding something peculiar. "It seems our storm has delivered an unexpected guest," she murmured, grasping her companion's arm tightly. "Shall we investigate?" As they stepped back into the darkness of the manor, a piercing scream pierced the night, echoing from the direction of the woods. A split second later, thunder cracked again, drowning out all rational thought. "Lady Verity!" Mrs. Primrose gasped, and the two women plunged forward towards an uncertain fate, hearts pounding with fear and urgency. Deep inside, Miss Marple felt a surge of resolve. Whatever secrets lay in wait that night, she would find them. Come rain or shine, they had to uncover the truth behind the strange disappearance, or the shadows of Ashgrave Manor would remain forever shrouded in mystery. Chapter 6. A Bottle of Poison. The rain poured relentlessly against the cobblestones of St. Mary Mead, a rhythmic drumming that echoed the turmoil swirling in the minds of its residents. It was the sort of evening that kept the townsfolk nestled tightly within their homes, with only the occasional flicker of candlelight escaping through drawn curtains to spill onto the street. As Miss Marple adjusted her shawl and stepped out into the sodden path leading toward the manor house, an icy tendril of foreboding snaked through her thoughts, an unsettling feeling that this storm was only the prelude to darker events. She approached the Cresswell estate, its formidable facade almost ghostly under the shivering embrace of rain. Despite the hour, Miss Marple could hear muffled voices from within, a dispute, sharp and insistent. She paused for a moment on the threshold, feeling the tug of tension that seemed to ooze from the very walls of the manor. The scent of wet earth was heavy, and there was an oppressive weight to the atmosphere that made her senses alert. As she stepped inside, the warmth welcomed her, but the sight of the gathered guests only compounded her trepidation. The drawing room, lavish yet ordinariness itself, was packed with ghastly tension. At the center, Flora Cresswell stood, her hands trembling slightly as she clasped a letter and gesticulated toward her brother, Edward. She was a young woman whose beauty once lit any room but was now shadowed by suspicion etched into her delicate features. "Flora, dear," Edward snapped, his voice a feverish whisper beneath the echoes of thunder outside. "This is not the time to turn on your own family. What good could possibly come from this outburst?" "But I found it in his study." Flora's voice rose, tinged with desperation. "It's a letter discussing a bottle of poison, Edward, the very same poison found in Aunt Mildred's drink." The air thickened with silence, everyone frozen in their respective states of dismay. Miss Marple stepped forward, her presence both calming and formidable. "Forgive my intrusion, but I couldn't help overhearing. Poison, you say? Was it written in the letter who intended to use this poison?" Flora nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "It was addressed to Father. Someone was trying to implicate him. You know what they say about him, Miss Marple. Father's a recluse, obsessed with his garden. Everyone thinks he's gone mad." Miss Marple took a slow step back, observing Edward's face clouding with distress. It struck her as odd. The brother was clearly agitated. Perhaps it was familial concern, or perhaps there was something more clandestine lurking beneath the surface. "And did your father receive that letter?" she asked. "No," Flora replied, shaking her head. "I hid it before he could see it." "Did anyone else know you found it?" Miss Marple pressed gently, her voice careful and deliberate. A pin could be heard falling in the room as she turned her attention to the others gathered, a group caught in a cadaverous web of secrets and lies. Edward shifted, his discomfort palpable. "This is nonsense. My father doesn't associate with anyone who would send him such a thing." "But does he not associate with you?" she inquired swiftly. His expression turned feverish, as if caught in a sudden revelation. "You don't understand my family dynamics, Miss Marple. We all have our own lives. I see him only occasionally." The rain sang a pitiful serenade against the windows, drowning out the hushed murmurs echoed around the room. But one other figure caught Miss Marple's discerning gaze. Dimmed by shadows, a woman named Clara, the family housekeeper, appeared strangely adrift among the chaos before them. She stood quietly by the mantel, her fingers brushing the edge of a crystal decanter. "Clara," Miss Marple said, her voice coaxing yet stern, "what part do you play in all of this?" "It was never my place to speak," Clara murmured, her eyes darting cautiously between Edward and Flora. "But there were whispers of old family grudges. Your family has always lived a quiet life, but I've seen things." "What things?" Flora demanded, the weakness in her voice hardening. "Things best left unsaid," Clara insisted, stepping back as a tremor ran through her frame. In that moment, Miss Marple noticed something peeking from the edge of the silver-framed painting above the mantel. A small rectangle of paper, partially concealed. She crossed over and gently drew it out, her heart quickening as she recognized the elegant handwriting. "It seems," she announced, her voice carrying a tremor of urgency, "that Aunt Mildred was writing to someone just before her demise. It speaks of regret, of a mistake." Flora leaned in closer, her breath catching. "What does it say?" Miss Marple hesitated, the weight of the moment sinking in. The letter did not share the table's secrets lightly. It held a key truth that could unravel them all. Suddenly, as if alive with foreboding, the lights flickered, bathing the room in fleeting shadows. "I believe it contains information about acknowledgement of a poison unventured," Miss Marple said, letting the words linger heavily in the air. "We must find out who desired your aunt's end, and why." Just as the tension raised a hushed urgency draping around them, a distant crash erupted outside, drawing all eyes to the window. A figure stumbled in the rain, half hidden by the storm, swaying against the wind. As the figure approached, soaked and barely recognizable, Flora gasped. "It's Gertrude," she exclaimed, a tone of sheer panic gripping her voice. "She went out to the old cottage." As if cast in a cinematic frame, Miss Marple's heart raced as all eyes bore into the door, the definitive answer to their tangled web just beyond its creaking edges. She straightened, the air thick with the promise of revelation and danger hanging palpably in the air. The mystery thickened, yet she knew this night, drenched in rain and despair, was far from over. The past was beginning to bleed into the present, and she was determined to unravel it all, right down to the last drop of poison. Chapter 7. A Whisper from the Dead. The relentless patter of rain drummed upon the roof of St. Mary Mead, a sinister symphony that matched the unease in Agatha Marple's heart. The whisperings of the village, once a comforting murmur, had turned discordant in the wake of the curious murder of Mrs. Hargrove. Just the previous afternoon, Miss Marple had uncovered hints that suggested there were secrets deep enough to drown in. Now, as she stepped gingerly through the misty twilight towards the Hargrove estate, the looming silhouette of the manor stood out against the darkened sky, shrouded with an air of foreboding. Miss Marple pulled her frayed woolen shawl tighter around her shoulders, her thoughts racing while she navigated the slick cobblestones. She had promised herself to unravel the mystery behind the doomed matriarch of the Hargrove household before the next village gathering, an event that was looming closer with each passing minute, yet now felt laden with spectral tension. The soft glow of the manor's windows beckoned like a siren, whispering promises of closure, but her instincts reminded her to tread lightly. As she entered the grand foyer, the scent of damp wood fused with the faintest trace of lavender, Mrs. Hargrove's signature fragrance that lingered like a ghost haunting her cherished home. The faint creaking of the floorboards seemed to echo the secrets held within the opulent but faded rooms. Miss Marple approached the drawing room, where a sullen gathering of the deceased's closest friends was now taking place. Among them was Lady Agnes Langley, a sharp-tongued socialite, whose icy demeanour contrasted starkly against the sombre atmosphere. "Miss Marple," Lady Langley exclaimed, her voice just above a whisper. "I suppose you've come to play detective once more, have you? Those of us with real grief here hardly need more speculation. I do wish to know what you think you'll find." "Why, Lady Agnes, think of me as a diligent gardener, keen to prune away the weeds choking the truth," Miss Marple replied, with a gentle smile, masking her rising doubts. The cryptic remark did little to alleviate the tension in the air. While most guests wandered about sharing dull anecdotes of Mrs. Hargrove's charitable endeavours, Miss Marple turned her attention to a peculiar detail. A portrait of Mrs. Hargrove hung askew on the wall, its frame dusty, but the painting itself strangely luminous as the room flickered between darkness and the flickering candlelight. Drawing nearer, the detective observed something sparkling from beneath the edge of the painting where it met the wall. Curiosity piqued. She adjusted the picture frame and uncovered a silver locket, intricately engraved and rather opulent, until recently completely obscured by the dust of neglect. She displayed it openly against the muted tones of the room, sensing the weight of its revelation. Is this Margaret's locket?" A voice trembled from behind her. It was Peter Hargrove, a distant cousin who once showed a tender disposition towards Mrs. Hargrove. Now, however, the glimmer in his eyes suggested either anxiety or perhaps anger. "That is not just any locket. It was a keepsake from her late husband, Edward." Miss Marple observed Peter's shifting demeanour with quiet scrutiny. "Then it seems this locket has been out of its rightful place, hasn't it? A curious thing to find here, amidst all the grieving and the bitter gossip." His face paled. "The last I recall, she wore it often. It bears sentimental value, yes, but I fear the manner of its discovery leads me to believe darker matters linger, perhaps foul play." His frayed emotions laid bare an underlying motive. Did Peter covet the inheritance more than he dared to admit? But before she could further probe, a sudden commotion arose in the far corner of the room as Lady Agnes shouted for everyone's attention. "Enough of this. It is impossible to grieve when the air is thick with intrigue and suspicion," she bellowed, her eyes darting suspiciously between faces. "Is there anyone here who believes Miss Marple can truly unveil the culprit behind Margaret's death? What I do not understand is why we find ourselves dissecting every memory rather than holding true to our sorrow." "Because, my dear Lady Langley," Miss Marple interjected, her voice calm amidst the rising storm, "the dead often have more to tell than they did in life. It only takes an attentive ear and a vigilant heart to decipher their whispers." The crowd stirred, some murmuring in agreement, while others simpered indignantly. Uncle Abel, Mrs. Hargrove's late husband's brother, a notorious skeptic, interjected, his eyes narrowing. "I dare say, Miss Marple, what do you suppose the dead would tell us?" Miss Marple pondered, the locket resting cool in her palm. "Perhaps they'd caution us to examine closely those who surround us, or perhaps caution against harbouring resentments that bear greater fangs than one might expect." Misdirection suffused the room as she casually placed the locket back in its hiding place behind the painting. No one needed to see it now. They only needed the precious hint that it existed. Just then, a rattle of thunder shook the house, as the wind howled like an aggrieved spirit, punctuating the unsettled air with an unsettling vibration. "Now, if you will excuse me," Miss Marple said, "it seems that not all the truths reside within these walls, and I want to hear more from the dead." As she retreated, a feeling of colossal urgency washed over her. There was something important about the locket that demanded her further scrutiny. Making her way into the shadowy corridor lined with forgotten family portraits, Miss Marple racked her brain, discerning the connections. The locket accompanied memories. Someone had sought to bring it to light, yet it was hidden by mischief. Masculine footsteps suddenly echoed behind her, and she felt a presence drawing closer. "Miss Marple," Peter's voice whispered from the shadows, carrying a mixture of desperation and determination. "We must talk alone. There's something else I need you to know, something beyond the whispers of the dead, something that could change everything." As the rain hammered against the old manor, rattling its very foundations, Miss Marple felt the unmistakable chill of danger creeping in. The entrance to the room she had just left swung ominously open. Eyes glinting through the half-lit corridor, she took a step back, just in time to catch a glimpse of the darkened figures closing in around her. The intimacy of their shared secrets made her heart race, and she grasped the locket, realizing, as if the air itself whispered the message, that this nexus of deception was just beginning to unravel. She stood at the precipice, knowing the next revelation could uncover everything or trap her within the dark threads of a deceitful web. Chapter 8. The Portrait that knew the rain beat down upon the weathered stones of Ashford Manor, painting the world in shadow and gloom. Inside, the flickering shadows of the chandelier danced against the walls, the drapes drawn tight, as if to keep the secrets of the house at bay. Miss Marple, seated in the drawing room, was absorbed in a faded volume of local history when the tension in the air shifted, crackling like the storm outside. A scream shattered the silence, piercing through the patter of the rain and unsettling the very core of the manor. "Miss Marple, come quickly!" It was Miss Helena Farnsworth, a woman of delicate constitution, her pale face twisted in horror. The command in her voice brooked no argument. Miss Marple rose at once, the spine of the book still warm in her hands as she followed Helena down the echoing hall, the floorboards creaking underfoot. In the dim light of the portrait gallery, the flicker of candlelight mingled with the darkened sky outside. There, against the backdrop of a grand, sweeping portrait, lay the body of Lord Basil Ashford, his once royal blue velvet jacket now marred by a crimson stain spreading across his chest. His eyes, at once frozen in surprise and pain, gazed out, as if at some terrible truth known only to him. Helena trembled beside Miss Marple, her breath quickening. "He was well just moments ago. I cannot understand." Miss Marple knelt by the deceased, her discerning gaze wandering over the scene. The portrait behind Lord Basil, painted by a famous artist, captured the very essence of the Ashford lineage. "Curious," she murmured softly, brushing her fingers against the frame, "that the Last Supper held in this manner should be rendered like this upon canvas. How can you speak of art at such a time, Miss Marple?" Helena's voice trembled with disbelief. "It is a matter of life and death. And that, my dear, is precisely where you err," mused Miss Marple, her keen mind thrusting forward as she took in all the details. The scattered letters on the table nearby, the ornate glass that lay tipped over, and the paint on the frame. Each piece of the puzzle whispered its story, which only her instinct could conjure into light. At that moment, the manor's door swung wide, revealing Inspector Craddock, a man with a brow perpetually knitted by duty and a uniform exuding authority. "Miss Marple, I trust you were not alone when you found Lord Basil?" "No, Inspector," she replied, her voice steady and low. We arrived together, but I fear— Fear is but a constant companion in these halls, Craddock interjected, surveying the scene with a practiced eye. He turned slowly to the portrait, eyes narrowing. What do you suggest, Miss Marple? A family feud gone awry. Or perhaps an envious admirer, Inspector, she countered, rising slowly, her eyes scanning the surrounding gentry. Lord Basil hadn't been universally beloved. The Ashfords, once the pride of the village, now had their share of rivals and resentments. There was a lingering scent of rivalry wafting from the painting itself. It was alive, the eyes of ancestral Ashfords watching them closely. It nagged at her as she realized that the very artist had been entwined in their lives only months before. It seems to me, Miss Marple continued, her voice a whisper in the tense atmosphere, that the letter he was clutching with his last breaths has gone missing. A remarkable slip, don't you think? Shall we perhaps question dear Helena? Her passion for letters might lead us to the truth. Helena flinched at the mention of the letter. I have done no such thing, Miss Marple. Why should you suspect me? My brother Thomas— Your brother Thomas had every reason to resent Lord Basil, Miss Marple interrupted, her eyes sharp as the winter wind. Ah, but he went to London this morning. No, my dear, I suspect the artist, the one who captured the essence of the Ashford legacy on canvas. Such familiarity can breed envy. An artist left, unsung, while the subject basked in honor. Inspector Craddock appeared skeptical, yet intrigued. That is not concrete evidence, Miss Marple, and the man is well known here. Who wouldn't covet a commission from the Ashfords? The same man, she continued, brushing rainwater from her coat collar, may harbor emotions he failed to express, like shallow jealousy cloaked in admiration. The way he wielded his brush could also be how he pressed his desires into a knife. The tension in the room thickened, and Craddock exchanged glances with the other guests who had begun to gather, shadows of suspicion reflecting on their faces. There's something chillingly foreboding in the artistry of it all, he muttered, contemplating the implications of her words. Suddenly, a sharp intake of breath startled them all. Doris Beckwith, the maid, appeared in the doorway, eyes wide, as she clutched the remains of a crumpled letter. I'm sorry for intruding, but I found this. It's written in Lord Basil's hand. Miss Marple beckoned forward, her heart racing as Doris cautiously approached. The lightning flashed outside, illuminating the hastily scrawled note that could unveil secrets better left buried. Yet, the very second she held it aloft, the lights flickered and a violent crash echoed through the manor, plunging them all into darkness, the ancestral eyes in the portrait now consuming the light as dread settled like a heavy cloak around them. Miss Marple, came Helena's voice, trembling. What does it say? I cannot say, she began, her mind racing as disaster loomed, and a single thought pulsed in her mind. They were all trapped here. The portrait knew their secrets, and before the night had finished unraveling, it would certainly share its dark truths. As the storm intensified, Miss Marple clutched the letter tighter, the threats and promises in the shadows growing ever nearer, the true intentions of their gathering now veiled in an even thicker shroud of mystery. It was no longer merely a murder they were dealing with. It was something altogether more sinister. Who among them was willing to kill for a whisper of revenge, and what would she uncover next? Chapter 9. The Final Trap. The wind howled through the moors like a banshee, tearing at the branches of the ancient oaks that stood sentinel over the Ravenstone manor. Rain lashed against the grand windows, each drop a percussionist announcing impending doom. As the clock struck 10, a startling sound shattered the isolation of the manor. A metallic thud, heavy and foreboding, echoed from the study where Lord Everleigh had spent his last tranquil moments with a pipe and a volume of poetry just the previous evening. Miss Marple stood there now, all too aware of the darkness lurking in the corners of the room, a darkness that, for some, had become so familiar. She glanced towards Colonel Hargreaves, whose face was a mask of ill-concealed dread. "Do you think it could be?" he whispered, eyes darting around the room as if expecting the dead to rise. "If it is what we suspect," said Miss Marple quietly, fixing her grey eyes on the doorway as if communicating with the very wood, "then we have little time before more secrets are revealed." Stepping into the study, the detective paused, noting the pattern of scattered papers strewn across the desk. Among them, a solitary note caught her eye, a hastily written missive that smelt faintly of lavender. Unfolding it, she read the words, "I can't wait any longer. Meet me where it all began." The ink was smudged in one corner, as if the writer had been in haste. "It's from Lady Villiers," exclaimed Colonel Hargreaves, his voice a mixture of confusion and excitement. "But what could she possibly be meeting someone about at this hour? And who exactly?" "The plot thickens," replied Miss Marple, tucking the note into her coat pocket. "Perhaps we're overlooking more than we initially thought. Every detail matters." Outside, rain tapped furiously against the glass, creating a hypnotic rhythm. The storm brewed outside, yet in Miss Marple's mind, the storm was building inside, whispers of motives and hidden fears swirling dangerously, teasing the edges of the preconceived narratives each suspect wore like a second skin. "Perhaps we should search the grounds," Hargreaves suggested, pulling on his cape. "Ideally, we could catch whoever the note is intended for." "Caution, Colonel. Every craving to discover the truth can lead us into snares that are better left unstepped upon." Miss Marple moved toward the darkened window, peering into the chaotic downpour. The night was fractious, like the nature of the very people they sought to understand. Out of the corner of her eye, she noticed something, a faint glimmer in the far distance. It was near the old chapel, the abandoned stone structure, now barely more than a silhouette against the raging storm. "We must investigate," she declared, already knowing she would go alone. "Stay here in case anyone attempts to return." The colonel hesitated, but begrudgingly nodded, knowing better than to argue against her intuition. "You have a strange knack for drawing trouble towards you, Miss Marple." "Perhaps," she commented lightly, stepping into the rain. With determined strides, she made her way down the narrow path, the gravel crunching beneath her sensible shoes. Each step was accompanied by the sudden flares of lightning, illuminating the twisted branches and moss-laden stones. As she reached the chapel, the door creaked ominously, enticing her to enter. Inside, the dampness hung heavy in the air, filled with an otherworldly silence that spelled secrets. Moonlight filtered through the cracked archway, revealing scattered pews where forgotten prayers had once floated. It was there, in the flickering shadows, that she spotted something, a handkerchief embroidered with the initials LV stirring her unwavering sense of deduction. She pressed it to her nose. The faint scent of lavender, while not unexpected, was somehow unsettling. Lady Villiers had been here. Had she left it intentionally, or was it a discarded remnant of her clandestine encounter? The storm surged in ferocity, and with a distant rumble, Miss Marple felt the tension in the air twist and snap like a taut string on a violin. She stepped outside, preparing to journey back to the manor, when a sudden figure materialized through sheets of rain. Lady Villiers herself. "Miss Marple." The lady's voice quivered as she came closer, her face pale in the dim light. "You must help me. I didn't mean for anyone to know." "Lady Villiers," Miss Marple said gently, "what have you gotten yourself into? Believe your meeting is of utmost importance, and I happen to have found your handkerchief in an unfortunate place." "Please," she whispered, panic rising like bile. "It was never intended for you to know. I told him I needed time, but he insists. I cannot lose everything." "Everything?" Miss Marple prodded, instinctually aware of the layers of desperation. "Your life, your happiness, or is it something far darker?" Before Lady Villiers could respond, a sudden crash of thunder drowned their conversation. The chapel trembled, and a deafening silence followed. Catching her breath, Miss Marple scanned the surroundings, stepping cautiously toward the side of the chapel, where a previously unnoticed doorway emanated a flicker of unnatural light. It was ajar. "Come with me," she commanded, beckoning Lady Villiers towards the entrance, her heart pounding with burgeoning dread and curiosity combined. As they approached the door, the light flickered again, and clarity struck like a lightning bolt. The handkerchief, the note, and now this forsaken door. They were pieces perfectly placed in a hidden tableau of intrigue. "Wait," she murmured as they neared the threshold. "Something isn't right." Before she could utter further words of caution, the ground beneath them gave an ominous rumble, a sound coupled with a faint scream that echoed from within. Time froze, and at that moment, the truth drifted into the air like smoke, threatening, suffocating, undeniable. "Miss Marple," Lady Villiers gasped in horror, grabbing her arm. "Don't you see? We're walking into a trap." Peering into the abyss of the unknown that beckoned them, Miss Marple steeled herself. It was a trap indeed, but perhaps it was time the web of deceit was unraveled, once and for all. But what lay waiting within those walls of revelation? As the atmosphere buzzed with tension, darkness loomed ever closer, cementing their fate as the clock ticked, revealing that the final trap had ensnared more than either had bargained for. Chapter 10. The Truth Buried in the Garden. The rain fell relentlessly, drenching the quaint village of St. Mary Mead under a shroud of grey. It was on this night, with wind howling like a spectre and the distant chime of the church clock tolling the hour, that Miss Marple found herself kneeling in the mud of the backyard of the old Greenhall Manor. Geraldine Greenhall's voice echoed in her mind, sharp and insistent. "You must help us, Miss Marple. Something dreadful has happened." The suffocating smell of damp earth cloaked Miss Marple, but she was oblivious to the chill her intuition piqued. Alone with only her thoughts, she focused on the raised flower bed that bordered the crumbling stone wall. Beneath the carefully arranged petals of the English roses, she recalled the peculiar flutter in the air earlier. Geraldine's agitated demeanor the moment they spoke of her late brother, Lawrence, who had mysteriously vanished almost 2 decades prior. That day, Geraldine had nearly tripped over her own words, scrambling to distance herself from any notions of distress. Miss Marple's steel-grey eyes caught the hint of something unusual. A corner of the soil shifted ever so slightly, just enough to pertain her interest. She leaned closer, her fingers tracing what seemed to be a tattered scrap of fabric barely visible among the root-clad earth. She tugged gently, pulling free a small, torn piece of a man's checkered shirt. The winds howled louder, as if the night were attempting to swallow this discovery back down. Instinctively, she brushed her hands clean against her shawl, her heart pounding with the realization that it was not just her imagination. This piece of cloth could be linked to the unsolved case of Lawrence Greenhall's disappearance. With a deep breath, she stood and turned. "Miss Marple?" It was Arthur Dunstan, Geraldine's next-door neighbor, wrapped in an oversized coat as he approached, his expression a tapestry of confusion and concern. "What on earth are you doing here in the dead of night? You shouldn't be out in this weather." "Arthur," she greeted softly, her face revealing none of the chaotic thoughts that swirled in her mind. "I might be unearthing some forgotten truths. Won't you join me a moment, please? It seems a curious fabric has revealed itself." He stepped closer, eyes widening, as she gestured toward the patch of mud. "More of Geraldine's antics, I presume? She has always had a flair for the dramatic." "Ah, but sometimes drama hides truths just beneath the surface," Miss Marple replied, unable to mask her intrigue. "Lawrence?" His voice dropped to a whisper, eyes darting around as though he expected hidden spies. "You think this is his? We must consider all possibilities." She tucked the piece of fabric into the pocket of her cardigan, sparking a grim spark in her mind. Geraldine mentioned a quarrel before his disappearance, something about a feud, and I wonder if this is somehow connected. Dunstan shifted uncomfortably, hands stuffed deep into his pockets, his brow furrowed. "People sometimes lose their tempers. Could have been anything. Besides, the villagers' gossip about Lawrence growing up leaves much to be desired." "Ah, but it is in the whispers that one often uncovers the truth," she countered, the urgency threading her voice as she began walking toward the manor. "Tell me, Arthur, you were once friends with Lawrence, were you not?" "Acquaintances, Miss Marple. Just good. Company and drink. A more boisterous youth, shall we say? He could be rather reckless." The tremor in his voice suggested more than mere nostalgia. "Reckless how?" He hesitated, an unknown emotion dancing across his face. "With women, perhaps? He had a way of charming and then abandoning." "A heartbreaker, then?" She nodded thoughtfully, images of Lawrence's charm, mixing with insecurity, spiraled in her thoughts. And did any of these dalliances involve someone particularly close? Anyone who might have felt scorned? Dunstan shifted again, anxiety radiating from him like a heat wave. "There was talk of a girl, Edith, I believe. She spent time in the village before running off. Rumor had it they had had a falling out. But that's just gossip, Miss Marple. You know how it goes." "Gossip holds its own truths, Arthur," she stated meaningfully, enjoying the way his lips pressed together in indecision. "Do you recall any specifics?" He sighed deeply, the lines around his eyes deepening. "I suppose she had a penchant for gardening. A curious woman, but I never knew her well. No one did, really." "Gardening, you say?" A sharp glimmer burned in her mind's eye as she recalled Geraldine's own beloved blooms. "As in flowers or vegetables?" "Flowers mostly. She had a boldness about her, or so I heard." Miss Marple's mind raced with possibilities as ideas entwined like branches of hedgerows when a crack of lightning illuminated the dark sky. The thunder echoed in sympathetic groans, and she felt an electric thrill pulse through the air. "Perhaps I ought to pay dear Edith a visit. There may be buried truths in gardens I've yet to discover." Before she could react, a sudden noise startled them both. From behind the dilapidated hedges emerged none other than Geraldine, her eyes wild and cheeks drenched, as storm-tossed as the evening. "Arthur! Miss Marple!" she shouted. "You must come quickly. There's been another incident. I fear the worst." The rain drummed its cruel symphony around them, and as they hurried towards the manor, Miss Marple felt the weight of secrets whispering their urgency. She clutched the fabric in her pocket. Was Lawrence Greenhaw merely a disappearance long left unsolved, or was there something more sinister beneath the rose-laden earth? The truth, she realized, was buried not far from where it all began, and she would uncover it before the night ended, come what may. Chapter 11. The Confession. No one heard. The rain lashed against the windows of Miss Marple's quaint cottage like an impatient hand, demanding entry to the secrets of another night. The air inside was warm and inviting, the aroma of freshly brewed tea mingling with the scent of polished wood. Yet, a palpable tension hung about the room, daring to break free like a storm, ready to unleash its fury. As she sat in her armchair, her knitting needles poised, but unmoving, the door creaked open, revealing Constable Baines, drenched and out of breath. "Miss Marple, I'm afraid it's urgent," he gasped, water flecking the floor like a string of clues recently discarded. "What is it, Constable?" Marple put down her knitting, her eyes narrowing with keen interest. He stepped closer, his heart racing. "Another murder, ma'am. Arthur Featherstone has been found dead at the bottom of the stairs in Periwinkle Manor." "That's dreadful," Miss Marple exclaimed, her mind instantly working through the implications of the news. What did he fall from? Was it an accident? His wife believes otherwise. She insists he received a threatening letter just before his death. A confession of sorts. Baines stammered, shaking his head in disbelief. But no one seems to have heard it. Miss Marple's mind buzzed with thoughts. The Featherstones had been at the heart of the village's scandals. Their hosting of the yearly charity gala was infamous for more than just philanthropy. The undercurrents of envy, betrayal, and suppressed desires that swirled through the village were inexorably tied to the couple. "I must go," she decided, rising swiftly, her purpose igniting a quiet fire within her. The torrential rain drummed a relentless rhythm against the cobblestones as they made their way to Periwinkle Manor, the estate looming like a dark spectre amidst the night's fury. The glow of orange light from the windows offered little comfort. Shadows danced, casting a macabre ambiance across the grandiose facade. Inside, the manor was cluttered with the remnants of a life recently lived, a forgotten socialite's dream now faded and draped in screams from beyond. Eloise Featherstone stood at the foot of the staircase, her once vibrant dress now crumpled as if it too shared in her despair. Her face was pale, bereft of color. "Eloise," Miss Marple said gently, moving closer, "I'm so sorry for your loss." "No one will believe me," she exclaimed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Arthur was going to expose someone. He said he found out something terrible. I thought it was just his wild imagination, but—" Her voice faltered, grasping for truth amidst the storm of grief. "Who was he going to expose?" Marple asked, her tone firm yet compassionate, drawing out Eloise's pain like a skilled surgeon. No time for mere sympathy. The mystery demanded resolution. Eloise's gaze darted to the shadows, her voice almost a whisper. "He mentioned Roderick Evans. They were friends, but Arthur, he was different. I didn't know he was so curious." "Curiosity can kill," Miss Marple stated, considering the implications with sharp clarity. "What about the letter? This confession? It's somewhere among his things. I don't know what he wrote, but it terrified him. He kept it secret. And now—" Her voice trailed into silence, the unspeakable too heavy to articulate. Constable Baines strode away from them to inspect the stairs. Each creak of wood was like a ghostly echo of agonized moments passed. "There's blood here, Miss Marple," he called, his breath hitching. But no sign of a struggle. If it was murder, the killer must have been near. Or someone who knew how to take advantage of a moment, Marple mused thoughtfully. Did they argue? "Not that anyone heard," Baines replied, his brow furrowing. Quiet like death itself. Miss Marple's mind whirled as she paced the ground, leaning slightly against the banister. The leftover sounds of Arthur's life clung to the walls, whispering, secrets that only the shadows might hear. "We must look at the other guests who attended the last gala," she proposed. "There could be motives hidden beneath politeness." Suddenly, Miss Marple's eyes caught a glimmer beneath the stare. A small, embossed envelope, half hidden in the carpet's edge. "What's this?" she murmured, plucking it free. As she unfolded it, her heart raced. Written in a jagged sprawl were the words, "Your past is not safe. The truth will tear us apart. Find Roderick before it's too late." "This," she began, turning the note over, as a knot of dread twisted in her gut. "This confirms Eloise's fears. Arthur was on the cusp of unveiling a truth that would have shattered the facade of this quaint village." As the implications settled like fateful raindrops around them, Eloise's eyes filled with a haunting realization. Roderick. But he's here, isn't he? Isn't he? Just then, the heavy oak door creaked open, creating an ominous chill that washed over the room. A figure stepped inside, cloaked in shadows, his face just a mask against the flickering firelight. "Looking for me, ladies?" came a deep, unwelcome voice, sending a shiver down Miss Marple's spine. It was Roderick Evans, a smirk tugging at his lips. Before anyone could move, he added, "I believe our dear Arthur was about to make some very interesting revelations." From the depths of this downfall, Miss Marple felt the intricate web growing tighter. Clarity washed over her as the rain pounded on, matching the quickening tempo of her heartbeat. She had found something vital, a clue to unravel it all. The confession no one had heard was at the heart of it, which would lead her straight into Chapter 12, and the truth hanging just beyond reach. Chapter 12. The Secret Beneath the Staircase. The wind howled through the crumbling walls of Crestwood Manor, sending an eerie shiver through the damp air as Miss Marple moved cautiously through the darkened corridor. Outside, rain lashed against the windows like impatient fingers drumming for admission, adding a somber backdrop to the escalating tension of the mystery that had plagued the quaint village of St. Mary Mead for weeks. The shocking discovery of Sir Reginald Moffat's body lingering still brought every resident to the edge of paranoia, and it was in the shadows of this grand but decrepit home that truths long buried were waiting to be unearthed. Marple paused just before the staircase, the wooden steps creaking under her weight, revealing their age. Light flickered feebly from a solitary lantern that cast dancing comparisons of spectres, using the wall as a temporary canvas. She had been examining the cluttered study of the late Sir Reginald, where piles of papers hinted at legal disputes, and a particular envelope marked with his elegant handwriting held an address, one not entirely pleasant to contemplate, an address that led to the local keepers of secrets, the Gallows Inn, a place shunned by the proper society of St. Mary Mead. It was here, beneath the staircase, that something strange caught her eye. A small draught, nearly imperceptible to the untrained sense, drifted like a whisper from in between the plasterwork. Had she not trusted her instincts, she might have dismissed it, chalking it up to the house's languorous size. But fortified by the knowledge of its many mysteries, she knelt down to inspect the edges of the frame. A knot of reluctance twisted in her belly as she felt the cool, dust-laden wood. There was something decidedly amiss. "Miss Marple," came a fidgety voice from behind. It was Miss Clara Hobbs, the excitable but nervous housekeeper of Crestwood, her brow lined with worry and a fresh line of secrets reflecting in her large spectacles. "I thought I heard you. And the storm. I fear for the roof's integrity." Clara took a timid step back, sensing the depth of Miss Marple's concentration. "Indeed, Clara," she murmured, still fixated on the staircase. "Tell me, did you ever venture down here when Sir Reginald was alive? Did he often visit this area, this dark corner?" "Goodness, no, ma'am. Sir Reginald was always too busy with his affairs." The quaver in her voice spoke of fear, perhaps even guilt. "He had little use for nosy maids or the underbellies of his own home, most certainly avoids that corner." "And yet," Marple continued, her keen eye catching that small detail of Clara's discomfort, "the collection of dust betrays an untouched surface." She carefully pushed at the hidden panel. To her surprise, it shifted, revealing a small void beneath. A musty-smelling box rested inside, cloaked in cobwebs that had spun unchecked over the years. With Clara standing nervously behind her, Marple extracted the box, its heavy wood worn but intact. A keyhole cried out for a fitting key, yet desperation urged her to pry it open. Using a nearby letter opener from the desk, she pried the box ajar under the scrutiny of her assistant. The hinges protested loudly, echoing through the halls. Inside, a bundle of yellowed letters lay folded neatly, along with an antique locket, its glass face cracked, but still polished enough to reflect a faint glimmer of light. "Letters?" Clara gasped, hastily leaning forward. What could have been hidden for so long? Marple carefully unfolded the topmost letter, her brows knitting together as she read the date, October 1938, an alarming year in the Moffat family timeline. The words penned were evidence of a deep connection with an estranged lover, one that spoke of regret, secrecy, and a promise broken. "My dear Lottie," it began, touching upon shared moments. But even more startling was the implication that Sir Reginald had had a sister, Lottie, one who had vanished years ago under suspicious circumstances. "It cannot be. There only ever was a hint of a sister, and that was all hushed up, forgotten," Clara murmured, her eyes wide with shock. "But how did you know? How did you discover all this?" Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. "Because, my dear Clara, the details are seldom lost on a keen observer." She folded the letter and tucked it back into the box, wrapping her mind around the twisted relationships that seemed to shelter dark secrets. "And there's more that sits beneath the surface still, just like this staircase." Just then, a thunderclap resounded, and the lights flickered. The power faltered, plunging them into darkness for an unsettling heartbeat before the lantern steadied itself, illuminating Clara's panic-stricken face. "Oh, Miss Marple, what if someone knows we're here? What if—" "Calm yourself, Clara. We must not let fear dictate our actions. Secrets always scream louder when unearthed." Just as she assured Clara, footsteps echoed from above. A figure emerged at the top of the staircase, a shadow overcoming the light, and she felt an unsettling prickle dart down her spine as she recognized the looming silhouette of Nathaniel Moffat, Sir Reginald's reclusive cousin. "What are you doing here?" he croaked, his eyes glinting with a mixture of menace and curiosity. "You shouldn't be poking around here. Sir Reginald's troubles are not yours to meddle with." As the weight of Nathaniel's words sank in, a new layer unfurled in Miss Marple's mind. What did this man know about the past? Why the fierce protection over this dark family history? As the wind howled louder outside, Miss Marple now sensed that the spectres lurking in the manor's shadows were not solely ethereal. The tension soared as the locket tumbled from her grasp, hitting the floor with a resonating crack, a sudden and poignant reminder that some secrets were meant to be kept buried, while others beckoned to be unveiled. Whatever the truth held, beneath the staircase, it was no longer a solitary mystery. The unraveling was about to begin, and Miss Marple felt an unshakable certainty that the answers lay not just in words, but in the hearts of those who had held them for far too long. As the door slammed somewhere in the distance, Miss Marple braced herself, for something told her, something promised, that the next chapter of this tangled tale would begin in layers upon layers of deception. The storm intensified, and with it came the final clash of destinies as she prepared to untangle the cobwebs that gripped Crestwood Manor tightly in its grasp.